afternoon and welcome to the latest in the Lockdown Your Learning series of webinars. The series has been running for quite some time now and has covered several important and interesting topics, all of which you can access through the YouTube channel on the ictskillnet.ie homepage. Today, we're here to talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning and business automation with the aim of releasing human potential. So really, this is a practical look at these technologies. We hear a lot of hype around them. We hear a lot of what they're going to be able to do. So really today, what we're looking at is how these technologies are developing and how they're being implemented. Also in light of the current situation whereby the world of work was changing before the pandemic and has changed dramatically since. And as we adjust to this new mode, how these technologies can be brought together and combined to allow people to do what they do best, which is even more critical when physical contact and face-to-face time is getting very difficult. So I'm joined this morning by, or this afternoon rather, by Dr. Gavin Shorten of IBM and Donal Cullen of Spanish Point. Dr. Shorten is the Program Delivery Manager for IBM Cloud and AI Foundry. This is a new initiative that focuses on the commercialization of R&D through product and service delivery. IBM has a particular focus on the delivery of AI and cloud solutions combining bleeding edge technology with enterprise IT. Gavin is a veteran of IBM's Innovation Lab and supporting innovative programs. Donal Cullen is co-founder of and CEO of Spanish Point Technologies, where he ensures the right environment for innovation to be conceived, tested, and built for customers. Spanish Point delivers digital transformation through Microsoft technologies and has a growing software as a service capability with particular expertise and reach in the music industry. So we're going to start with Dr. Gavin Shorten, and he's going to do a short presentation, first of all, around the direction and development of AI and machine learning in particular.
Thanks for the introduction, Paul. So look, I guess I've got about 10 minutes, and what I thought would be a good thing to focus on was just actually talk about a very simple and applied use case for AI and machine learning that we've been working on in our team. And just before I kind of get into the specifics on that, I'm going to talk briefly about the team that I work in, really to emphasize the technologies that we're using, because you know, the delivery of AI and machine learning, it's not just about the analytics itself, it's about how you really leverage it and deliver it. And then also the kind of business consideration. So even moving away from the technology, if we move into an AI or machine learning project or decide that this is a valuable use case to invest in, there's lots more to consider rather than the, you know, just purely the value proposition and the legal constraints. In terms of our team, we work, and I guess this is kind of building up to the skills piece, which is quite important. We're very much cross-industry, and the key thing here is that our skills are kind of a horizontal across different technology areas, including, you know, some of the distinct pillars inside AI and machine learning, which I'll talk about in a sec. But our view is that we partner with an ecosystem of about 250 partners in Europe, and we look to match the best of IBM with the different use cases and requirements that come out of that. So as a result, we get to work in lots of really interesting things in health, IoT, security, and telco. I wanted to kind of just pause on this one for a second because, you know, my own background was in biomedical engineering. I did some, as we were joking before the call, I did some work in analytics as part of my PhD. It wasn't called AI at the time, but retrospectively, maybe I can hang my hat on that. But all of us have kind of worked in different domains around you know, different forms of analytics. But the traditional parts of engineering around, say, IoT, telco, software development, which is very core to the kind of the lab that I work in, we're really looking at use cases for AI and machine learning inside those pillars. And it's very important that you look from a skills perspective and application perspective, how that combines. To that end, then, I guess when we were building up our team to look at these kinds of use cases, we really had to recruit from within our lab. So the idea there was that we're embedded in our enterprise world. We've got the software development capability and all of the governance and commercials around that. But then we pulled skills in from this emerging and rapid kind of acceleration in the state of the art for AI from our ecosystem. So from R&D and partners in Ireland and in Europe, and embedded all then in an innovation program. So look, I guess, you know, moving more on specifically to a challenge, I decided to kind of talk a little bit about a simple use case of AI, but one that we haven't seen before up till recently when we tried it out. which was around survey taking. So I picked this topic because pretty much everyone's taken a survey at this stage. For sure, since we went into lockdown, we've been filling in a lot of surveys about how we're feeling and how our stay-at-home experience has been and all that kind of thing in IBM, with a view to providing feedback then around how we can try to improve and support people. Surveys traditionally are paper-based, and then when they became digitized, they basically took the same form, but now you took the survey online. And then if you think about really interesting use cases of surveys, normally you put a human inside the loop to try and ask probing questions and really get behind the hidden meaning of how somebody feels. So, you know, and then that human uses their intelligence to decide what the right next question is to ask. So simple thing like, you know, do you like ice cream? And they say no. You're not going to say, cool, what's your favorite flavor, right? But in a paper-based or digitized survey, you might. So this kind of doesn't make any sense. So then we thought, okay, we have traditional bot use cases, and bots are, you know, basically artificially intelligent things that have the ability to understand and present text or speech as it may be. Traditionally, we use that. We train up things. Watson is one of our AI capabilities. We train it up with loads of information about a specific topic. It could be, you know, an implementation for an insurance company. It could be a clinical use case, whatever it might be. And the idea is then the public can extract information, so they can query it and type in a question, and then the bot can interpret, and AI and Watson can interpret what you're looking for and then provide back the information. So we said, what if we flipped it on its head and tried to automate and make it more efficient to gather information? So we built this application, which we've made open source. So this isn't a sales pitch, it's there, and anybody can download it and use it for free. It's an application that basically lets an owner create a survey in exactly the same way. You've used tools to do it before, I'm sure. You input the questions you want to ask and what order, depending on the answers that are being seen. But at a click of a button now, you can deploy that out as a bot, and that bot then can be put behind any chat interface, whether it's like a Slack implementation or a social media implementation. And so now your survey is now in a conversational style, which is good. You can configure it in such a way that if somebody is, you know, answering in a particularly negative way or shown that they have a particular dislike for whatever it is that's being surveyed, you can ask, well, why is that? And why do you feel that way? And I'll come back to that in a moment. So what we're achieving here is it's more conversational based because of the AI. It's now scaled and automated because of the AI. And as the information is being collected, it's also analyzable in real time. And we can look for insights inside that information and extract meaning from it using what's called natural language understanding. But that really looks to look for keywords, topics, and sentiment inside the information that's being gathered. So really simple use case. Create your survey, deploy your bot, and look at the results. Okay, so let's talk about how we've actually used that. So when we initially went into global lockdown, for want of a better word, around March, April, we wanted to engage with our followers on social media, and we wanted to see how they were getting on during their stay-at-home experience. So this was around the time of the Together at Home concert that Lady Gaga et al. Were running, and IBM was a partner in kind of supporting that initiative. And the way it worked was simply that if people wanted to participate, they seen our tweet, we got a response from our bot that said, hey, we see you're interested in taking our survey. Let's chat in your direct message chat window. And we asked them 3 simple questions. What's your stay at home? Favorite stay at home together activities? How's technology basically shaped your life since the lockdown? And then we asked a really open question that says, what makes you feel hopeful about the future? And this is kind of key to you know, the difference between putting automation and AI, I guess, in an application like this. We didn't have to be prescriptive and say, you know, are family important to you during a lockdown? You know, do you miss not being able to go to the gym or go cycling more than 2 kilometers from your home? We kind of already know the answers. What we wanted to see was, if we ask an open-ended question about what makes you feel hopeful, what we've seen was as things came back and we analyzed responses, our AI was able to say, people are talking about their children, their parents, their grandparents, the people that they can't see. Let's categorize those as people talking about family and parenting. People are talking about looking forward to getting back to their health and fitness exercises. People are talking about disease. In this case, it was a vaccine, right? What makes you feel hopeful about the future? Well, a vaccine would be really nice. I'm hopeful that we can have one. And what we could also do is see what sentiment was in there. So if you were having a conversation with one of your friends, you wouldn't survey them by saying, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important do you think a vaccine is? You'd say, what makes you feel hopeful, or God, how do you think you're going to feel, or what makes you most hopeful about when this is all over? So we're able to bring a much more human feel, I guess, to the whole thing. And that was really what we were trying to achieve. The sentiment piece then is basically, you know, looking for when people mention these particular topics, so this is how are people actually expressing that, and we're able to say with a degree of probability whether it's positive or negative. And then what's cool there is that using that automation, and this is really important, the human in the loop for surveys is still the person that's creating the surveys and analyzing the information. What we were able to do here was actually focus our time in extracting the insights we had, comparing the insights that the AI gave us back to the raw text. So there's an explainability piece there and a confidence level. Yeah, that makes sense, actually. That's exactly what people are talking about. And then create the likes of this collateral to push it back to people. So we're not going back to people saying, yeah, the traditional thing that we hear, right, with surveys that says 1 in 10 people feel this way and 4 in 5 people feel that way. We're able to go back and say, well, we let you express how you felt, and this is what you said. So that's a bit of a game changer. In terms of what actually makes this work, though, and this is kind of what my role is in the team, every AI machine learning project, and I'm sure we're going to talk about hopefully other applications as well, there's a few assumptions you have to make. The first thing is you need lots and lots of data, and that's assuming that that's available. You need to really think about what the value proposition is, and do you have the data to provide the value that people are looking for? Ethically, should you be doing it? So it's one thing to know if you can or if there's enough data to do that. But from an ethics perspective, are we doing this for the right reasons, and will it provide the right insights and no unforeseen consequences? And then legal and compliance. And this has been massive, because in parallel to the massive acceleration of the development of AI machine learning tech, we've also had introduction of more tighter controls, and rightly so, around the likes of GDPR. There's new regulations in California. Brazil have just implemented their own version of it. So there's lots more controls about what you're using data for. And really it comes down to trust and consent. You're informing people on what you're doing. When people are talking to our survey bot, they know they're talking to a bot. And also our bot can answer questions like, who do you work for? What are you going to do with my information? Is it confidential? What kind of analysis are you going to do? So our bot can try to explain that. So we're augmenting the intelligence that the human has to interpret the results, and we're making sure that explainability is there as well, so that we can demonstrate the value that's there. So that's basically it. That's really quick kind of, I wanted to kind of do it by example, and hopefully that kind of stimulates some conversation. So
excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, a lot of talking points there. That's really good. Just a reminder, though, to anyone who hasn't joined us on these sessions before, the format here is that we're going to have, obviously we've just had Gavin's presentation there. We're now going to have a bit of a Q&A with Donald Cullen, particularly focusing on automation. But the second half of the session is going to be around kind of an open discussion where we have some questions and some talking points, as well as some polls for the audience. However, there's also, if people want to check down at the bottom of their screen, there's the Q&A function there, and we'll be monitoring that throughout and answering your questions as we go. So please do take advantage of that. If you really want to, then there's the raise hand function as well. If you'd like to address a question directly to the panel, and our producer Aideen can come to you with that. But we're just going to jump in first now and talk to Donald Cullen, CEO of Spanish Point Technologies. And Spanish Point has quite a bit of experience around automation and how that's currently being applied. So Donald, thank you very much for joining us. And just jumping straight in, well, I suppose if you could give us just a little bit of background on the company, and as we mentioned, you have particular expertise in the music industry, which people might find interesting. So if you give us just a little potted history first, and then we'll get in.
Okay, yeah. So thanks, Paul and Gavin. Thanks for that intro, and I've a couple of questions for sure. So just hang on there. But yeah, so Spanish Point Technologies are an Irish-based technology company, based here in Dublin, Ireland, with customers basically throughout the world now: the United States, Greece, France, Belgium, Italy, places like that, etc. And one of the things we do is we provide automation solutions around the music industry. And the big challenge that the music industry has come to the music industry over the last number of years is the explosion in data volumes. So what our software does is it helps artists who are publicly performed get played. What that meant in the past, if an artist was played on, say, 2FM in the morning, That's recorded, it's returned back to a copyright management organization, the place of Ireland, that's IMRO, and our system would work out what the song was, who owned the song, and then ensure the artist was paid for that. When the artist was played on 2FM, you had one radio station with one broadcast beacon and maybe 25,000 people listening to the song in their car on the way to work. Turn that around now and you have 25,000 people with Spotify on their iPhone, and they're all listening to different music. So in the past, we had one transaction and 25,000 people listening to it. Now we have 25,000 transactions. So our customers have seen their data volumes literally increase by orders of magnitude, 2, 3, 4 orders of magnitude. So we have a customer that has to work out songs from a list from Spotify with over 600 million transactions in it. And at least Spotify give them relatively good data. When they get data from YouTube, that they literally hundreds of millions of transactions with very poor data as to what might have been the song that was played in the background. So basically, we've had to turn to automation software and AI to help solve that problem. And that's what we do.
Excellent. Okay. Well, just kind of going back a little bit then in terms of automation in general,
Yeah.
In your experience, what are the most common areas or types of automation that you're seeing outside, say, the more traditional forms that people might think of, those flailing robots on car assembly lines and whatnot?
Yeah,
So where are you seeing it in business?
Yeah, that's a good question. And as you know, Paul, we have a systems integration side of our business that does digital transformation and automation. And I guess a lot of our colleagues and the participants on the call today will be familiar with RPA and what that means. And basically where that's coming from is that for a lot of enterprise customers, a lot of enterprise organizations, they tend to have traditional legacy monolithic systems that solve one difficult business process, such as billing for a utility company. But they might have a separate system that may be modern from Salesforce and Dynamics 365, which is customer relationship management. And they might have a third system, say for scheduling engineers. In the past, they were disconnected systems that were designed and built to solve that monolithic problem. The challenge those organizations have today are integrating those systems. And often that integration has been done with individuals who have multiple screens open at the same time. So they get a sales query, they look at the account, they look at the scheduling system. What's available today are automation tools which will analyze the activity of those the individuals, and then build automation in the background to replicate those tasks by connecting those systems with that automation software. So we see a lot of that. It's not where I think the real action is going to be, and it's not where I think the real value is going to be in the future, actually, Paul. I think the real value is going to be at the business departmental level, using some of the tools that, for instance, Gavin mentioned earlier, for business users to start to build their own automation solutions and start to connect their own systems together with these democratized cloud-based automation tools. That's where we see as the big game changer in the future.
Okay, and maybe looking at it slightly then from the other side, when businesses come to you looking to implement automation, what are typically the kinds of issues that they're trying to resolve? Because that example you used there in terms of bringing together what may have been siloed systems with some intelligence applied, it sounds good and it probably applies to a lot of different situations. But when somebody comes to you with automation in mind, typically what are the kinds of problems they're trying to solve?
So the big area of focus today is around customer interaction and automating the customer journey. Well, automating the customer journey, but the business goal is to improve the customer journey. And that's often around processes that involve applications and documentation. So, and there's a lot of space here to leverage the technologies that IBM, Oracle, Amazon, Microsoft, etc. are bringing to the market to really help in this space. So we've one customer who wants to disrupt the gas boiler market in the UK, Ireland, Europe, and the United States. And believe it or not, it's available for disruption. Their solution is a portal that allows customers to take a picture of their boiler and take a picture of their gas bill, sign the agreement with the organization before they provide that data, and for the AI tools in the background to work out what boiler they had. In the past, to get your boiler replaced, you needed an engineer to look at it, write down the model number, work out how old it was, what the connection was, what the power the power output is, etc. Now they can take a picture of the boiler, and using AI tools in the background, they can match that to previous images and say that's that type of boiler, therefore the customer is burning, they have an 8 kilowatt boiler. They can analyze their bill and use OCR to look at their bill and work out what their usage is. They can work out who they're with in terms of an account, etc. And then further with AI, they can go to the market and see what's the best value boiler to replace them with now. And then they can offer that job through a portal to a cohort of agents who can optimize their work practices to find a time that actually ships and delivers the boiler. So we think about the first example where you have a utility that has to access the billing system, has to access the scheduling system, has to understand the CRM. Now we have a startup called Swift Energy who have a portal where all of that's automated. And that's the kind of place where we see real value for automation. If you can use OCR to read the documents.
Okay.
You can train your documents with a previous repository of documents. If you can leverage the previous models that Gavin and his team have already built around, say, sentiment analysis or around some form of OCR, then that's brilliant. And we should talk about that in a moment, and the value of models to smaller organizations, startups, and medium-sized enterprises. And then if you can put in modern portal-based technology to guide the customer through the journey, then you just end up with a way better experience. So they're the really big wins we see out in the marketplace.
Okay. I see there are some questions coming in there on Q&A, so we'll get to those in a moment. We just have one or two more things that we'll speak to Gavin or speak to Donald about first, and then we'll get onto those. But please do keep those coming in, and we can see them there, and we'll address them as we go. But one of the other things, Donald, given the pace of development with these technologies, where do you see the areas that are likely to be able to leverage these technologies in the near term from that very sort of practical business perspective, say in process automation or workflow?
Yeah, so I think this is a great question. And again, I think there is hopeful upside here in terms of how we improve the outcomes for business and indeed how we improve the working environment for individuals. And we have to recognize that COVID has changed the landscape. We're all super hopeful, and I think it was interesting. Gavin's provided like a great AI example that was right on topic, Gavin. So hats off. It was on COVID and it demonstrated AI. So I guess you knew what you were doing. But I mean, that's an important point. So we have, and our customers have, colleagues who are at home trying to do their jobs. How can we make that work as meaningful as we possibly can so that they can add value to their organization? And we can do that by automating the repetitive tasks that people don't get a lot of value out of doing, and leaving them time to do the high value customer interaction that we know needs to be done. So if we look at a typical customer service, most of it works well most of the time. It's the small percentage where there are some unique challenges that cause the problem both for the customer, for the organization, and actually for the employees in those organizations that end up having to deal with somebody that has a problem. The engineer didn't turn up on time. It turns out their data was incorrect. They came with the wrong part, etc. And if they're too busy sorting out these standard problems, they don't have the time and intelligence to give to sort out those problems. So what we want is greater process automation around those tasks that we know we can build rules for. So can we look at the data, and can we have a machine-based learning profile of previous transactions that then says, look, this customer doesn't need to be credit checked anymore, pass it for payment. This schedule doesn't need to be interfered with anymore. Normally these types of customers at this type of location with this type of business, we can just schedule the engineer between 2 and 4 and there'll be somebody there. But actually this type of customer is a different type. You have to ring and make sure they're there at 2:45 because otherwise, so they're the kind of things that can be automated. The flow of information between systems. I mean, we all spend a lot of time taking information out of emails and keying it into systems. We can automate that now. There are tools there that allow us to automate it. Even if the emails are formatted differently, we have tools that can discern the account number, the product number, the customer code, etc., and enter it in another system and create a case, etc. So the low code, no code automation platforms are a great place to go, and a place I'd really advise people to start to look at. So it's not the big heavy engineering RPA type robots that cost lots of money, but it's the kind of democratized low code, no code automation platforms that I think are going to be big wins in the future.
Okay. Well, just to round off then, before we go into the general discussion, one of the things that probably happens as a result of a lot of the hype and the described promise of these technologies is probably balancing expectation with reality, and possibly avoiding some common pitfalls. So what are there common mistakes people make, and how do you manage those expectations when they come to you looking for implementation of technologies?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question actually, and I think one that really needs to be thought through and talked about. So customers that are successful that we work with, and probably customers Gavin works with, are customers that have already educated themselves around the capabilities of the technology and the domain area. They are customers, and everybody should understand that we think you're going to have an internal capability in these technologies. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to have teams of people, but you'll have to have people at the table who understand what the other parties' experts are saying, who can actually do some of the coding themselves, who can actually go on the journey with them. And I really think that that's a very important message. I mean, if IT over promises, what happens is we get slow delivery, we under-deliver, and the business just despairs of IT projects because they just find they're expensive, they're a lot of work, they have to turn up a lot of meetings, etc.
Okay, that's a really interesting point, because it very much reinforces a point we've been talking about in the previous session. It's very interesting to hear you apply that specifically to these technologies. But just keeping an eye on time now, and I'd like to invite Gavin back into the conversation here. We have two questions come in, which I think we can look at now. And certainly, if anybody else has any questions, please jump in on that Q&A, and we'll address each of them as we go. But the first question is: are there any standards, emerging or otherwise, with regard to automation, or is it still mostly proprietary? So maybe Donald, if you want to take that one first, and then we'll come to Gavin as well.
Yeah. So this is an important question in the IT industry, and it's an important question for the bigger players. They generally aren't in favor of standards, and they generally shy away from standards in this area. There's a second question which is kind of related to this actually, Paul, which I might bleed over into if you may. So I don't believe we're going to see strong standards in this area. However, I do believe we will see a lot of interoperability among the players. And I do believe we will see that the platforms will have to support connectors for hundreds and probably up to thousands of systems in a kind of a standardized fashion. So while there may not be standards for the automation, there should be the availability of standard interfaces. So we work with Microsoft, as you've said. Gavin is with IBM, another brilliant company. Both of them will have out-of-the-box connectors for the third-party tools like Salesforce, for instance. So the organizations who are hearing this today should say, I want to pick a platform that is committed to providing connectors. And I want to see the velocity of the new connectors they're adding per week, per month, per quarter. The big players have to invest in these connectors, because they're going to die otherwise, because they know the customers have exactly the problem that lies behind this question, which is, if I acquire a company in the morning and they don't run Salesforce, but they run Dynamics or Siebel or some other product, how am I going to connect this automation platform to it? And I can't answer that, but what I can say is, if your current provider is committed to investing in connectors and you're seeing that in the marketplace, then that's a good sign. And Gavin's firm, the guys we work with, Microsoft, AWS, etc., Salesforce, they all understand this. So I would look at that. Now, connectors are a thing in their own right. So having a capability to do integration and understand what's behind a connector and what's needed to make it work is a capability you should have yourself anyway. And it's not, for a lot of automation, it's simply out of the box and you click the check boxes and you decide. But for some of them, you're going to have to go in there and understand, do some configuration. So I hope that's answered your question. Don't see the standards coming, but see the platforms effectively getting to a standardized approach.
Okay, I'm just going to ask our producer Aideen to prepare the first poll for the audience, and maybe Gavin, if you want to come in on that, just in terms of standards, what are you seeing in there? And I know it's a very kind of open area, but what are you seeing in terms of both a desire for them and a movement towards them?
I think Donald did kind of capture it quite well. There's one side of this is that the technology is moving so fast, and there are also shifts in the technologies that are being used that I think standards in the approach we would have taken before will really struggle to keep up with where the industry is going. But what I will say is I've seen a huge amount of standardization in the underlying tech that solutions are being built on. So what I mean by that is, when I was, say, in 10, 15 years ago, when I was actually working as a software developer, there's probably 9, 10, 11 scripting languages that you needed to be kind of familiar with because you'd come across them. Nowadays, for, say, AI machine learning, there's really 1 or 2. So there's like Python is like the de facto go-to. And what that means is when it comes to interoperability, when you deliver in multiple components, they're definitely more consistent in even the languages and the structures that they're built within, which inherently makes it easier to connect them together. And then as Donald said, and this is like, just purely from an IBM perspective, this works well for us because we're a horizontal, like we do AI and machine learning, but we also do infrastructure and cloud. And so, our ability for it to be extensible and interoperable is critical. And for sure, how those connectors message and connect together, there is a level of standardization there in terms of different buses and information, whatever you want to call, streaming protocols that are becoming consistent. So yeah, it's a little bit of a yes and no answer, but for sure I can see it's a different approach to standardization, but there's definitely, I observe more consistency than I would have in the past.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to share the poll results there. So essentially we just asked if organizations are currently using a product that is described as having or employing AI technology, and a quarter of the audience has said yes, they are. So I think that probably reflects reasonably well the kind of adoption that we're seeing in terms of these technologies. So again, just an interesting point there. I think certainly we mentioned just in our discussion beforehand this phenomenon of AI washing, that there might be claims for greater usage than there actually is, but about maybe 25 or 30% is probably consistent with most of the other reports I've seen. What would you guys reaction be to that?
Well, as you know, this is so really what you're talking about is, the difference between statistical inference, machine learning, and AI. And, what's called AI may not necessarily be AI. I think, the market has got to a place where if you're using automated tools that are cloud-based and are helping with decisions, it kind of gets branded as AI, I guess, Paul. But, as Gavin would definitely know, it's not really AI. AI is a different class of thing, and it's using different algorithms and different technology and different maths. But yeah, it's an interesting one. Stuff gets sold all the time that isn't what it really is, I suppose. Yeah.
Gavin, what's your experience with that?
Yeah, I think that's pretty bang on. I think the results would be kind of what I would expect. I think what's really interesting is I'd wonder how many applications or processes are people using that and they don't know there's analytics or AI running in the background. So that maybe things are being presented. Simple things. It's not AI, but there are, there could be things even there are things in your web browser or whatever that are constantly looking to see what the user behavior is and making recommendations, and people are completely oblivious that this is happening. there's algorithms in the background learning your behavior and making those recommendations. Now, they may not be processes and tools you're using in your job, but I mean, you're interacting with AI in a way, at least in a way, every day, and you're probably not oblivious to it, but you're not conscious of it. So it may be a bit higher than people think too.
Just before we address the second question there, which is kind of a big one, we'll maybe flip it and look at it from the other side. We talked about managing expectations and people looking to implement things like AI, machine learning, and automation. But what about the other side there, where it's the human impact in working with these technologies? So, you know, we've all heard about automation replacing people in jobs, but really what seems to have been the case is that it's augmenting human effort, which is one of our key themes today. So how do organizations go about dealing with the impact of applying these technologies and having their workforce understand where it integrates and how it can potentially multiply their capabilities? So maybe Gavin, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a big topic, and it's actually something that our former CEO she did a lot around this. I think what's happening is the likes of AI, but technology in general, are changing the type of job that people are doing. And the graduates that you heard all these statistics before, the graduates that today will be working in a different industry than we were and are now. And I think that's the likely impact. It's not going to necessarily leave, you know, when people invented the phone, it had an impact on the postal service, but it doesn't mean inventing the phone was a bad idea. The postman just became a telco expert, right? That's just an anecdotal thing, but that's what we're talking about. I think it's changing the jobs, but it's not necessarily, the net effect won't be getting rid of them. It'll just be changing the nature of what we're doing.
Donal, in your experience in working with companies, say, that may have been using these kinds of automation tools for a while now, how have you seen that cultural element of this and the human side?
Yeah, I think it's important when you start on a journey for process automation and introducing AI that's going to change work practices, that you fully understand the business objective. Why are we doing it? Why do we need to do it as an organization? The very next thing you need to do is look at the winners and losers in your organization. Then you need to look at a communication strategy, and you need to look at how you mitigate it for the losers. I mean, if you decide to ignore it, okay, that's a business decision you make, but you need to understand it before you go down that road. And you need to have worked out how you're going to articulate the reasons for doing this to your users and to your colleagues. And then you need to go out and you need to articulate it. You should measure feedback. You should trial it and see, you should do some A/B testing around it and see what the impact of it is. If possible, you should incentivize people and gamify if you can. So make it interesting for people. But definitely you need a communication strategy. And if you just blunder into this and then just disrupt people's lives, and then you wonder why your process automation tool doesn't work, or why your customer satisfaction survey is indicating customers are less happy, then you should scratch your head and wonder why you didn't start off with, why are we doing this? How does it impact people? Are there losers in my organization? What am I going to do for those losers? And how do we get to the far side where we're a better organization, our customers are happier, and we're more effective? So that's what you've got to do. It's not new. I mean, IBM were doing it 40 years ago, and we were doing it when we started this business, but it's got to be done.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to ask Aideen to line up our second poll, and I think we'll introduce our last question, because there are a number of facets to it which are important. Do you believe AI could potentially present a danger to humanity in the future? And this raises a number of important questions. And on the one hand, you can look at it slightly flippantly insofar as, when you've actually made a purchase on eBay or Amazon, and then you're chased around for a week by 10 other options for what you've just bought. And then you kind of go, well, it's not that smart, is it? But on the other hand, then you see that a large number of organizations have petitioned governments around the world not to develop autonomous offensive weapons, essentially, because they have fears over where that could go. But we also see things in things like municipal developments where human bias has been translated into how machine learning and AI systems can work. So even in as sort of broad a topic as that, if we could maybe narrow it down to a couple of areas like that, what do we need to watch out for, I think, when we are developing these kinds of technologies and applying them, say, particularly to traditional services like public services that deal with people and individual cases? So maybe Gavin, if you could take that one first.
Yeah, I think there's a few approaches. You know, I mean, hypothetically, technology, of course, can be used for good and bad. I think what it comes down to is a few different things. I mean, if your company is going to be a service provider, you know, either directly of AI or machine learning tech, or as an enabling feature, you really do need to have a cultural ethos around what you're doing it for and what applications are acceptable and what aren't. I don't know if you've seen, but IBM actually withdrew an offering that we had recently, because there was potential for it to be used in an inappropriate way to classify, you know, facial recognition and so forth, with no evidence that it was being, but there was potential there that it could be, and therefore we withdrew it because it didn't sit with our ethos, and our CEO made that decision. So that's very much how you run your own company. In terms of the projects you engage in and the use case you're using it for, I think it comes back to what I said before about really thinking through, and Donald touched on this, what's the effect this is going to have? What purpose does it serve? Ethically, is it the correct thing to do? Legally, is it the correct thing to do? So I think we can expect regulation and governance to continue to evolve. Like I mentioned, GDPR, for example, a couple of years ago. But even where it's not regulated, it's really working through the project, and it's very important to work with your clients to understand, do they understand the impacts of what they're doing, the effect that this could have on people, society, their clients or their staff, and just manage it appropriately that way, I guess. So it's kind of twofold. But like everything else, it has to be managed.
Okay, Donald.
So the question is, do I believe AI could potentially present a danger to humanity in the future? The answer is I do believe it could potentially. Do I believe it will? I think that's an open question. Do I support regulation in this space? I do. Along with a number of other organizations, like Microsoft, have called for regulation of AI and the usage of AI. We need to have a framework not dissimilar to GDPR in a sense. So I think we'll see, and I hope we do see, because I think the question is spot on. I think we need to get in front of it and address it now. I mean, we use AI to identify artists who should be played on, who are played on Spotify. We know there are streaming platforms that are actually more interested in the person's mood. So they're interested in what song is being played, what mood they're in, and then they want to sell that to advertisers. But other people want to use those moods to program those people to change their behavior, etc. So like that's just an area we're not interested in going down. We don't think technology should be used for. But systems that are built for that purpose, you know, they should be regulated in my view. So that's my personal view, and I guess most of my colleagues' view. But yeah, I mean, we think it has the potential, and we think there should be regulation in this space.
And I think Donald is bang on, and I think the key thing, you know, the underlying principles that are already there is it has to be about transparency and trust between the people that are using the tech. And so if you are going to, for example, in that use case, analyze the information you have to look for mood, but people think that they're actually just interacting with a system to listen to a song, they should know about it. And if they know about it, it's their decision whether they accept it, if they're willing to accept it or not. You know, that's really important, I think.
Okay. Well, we're just on time at the moment, so we'll round off maybe with a final comment in light of our poll there. So we just asked people, have they in their role evaluated or implemented AI or machine learning technology? And 27% have come back and said they have. So again, that's probably reflecting that kind of quarter to third incidence of the use of the technology. So maybe just a final comment from each of you in terms of anybody who is looking at evaluating these technologies or beginning to implement them in their business, just a word of advice before they start. So maybe Donald, do you want to take that one first?
Sorry, I just saw another question came through here on whether or not if Europe had a regulation and the rest of the world didn't, would Europe be at a disadvantage? And it's a good point. I personally think in the long term, Europe will be better off with a better regulated environment, and we'll be a better society for it, and we'll probably win in the long term. So, Paul, I was distracted to your question. Your final question was
just a word of advice for any organization that might be looking to.
I mean, there are great opportunities to use this democratized technology, as Gavin mentioned, from many, there are many different options. My advice will be to start to learn about them and select small pilot projects, put aside a budget and time to experiment with the technology, and expect that over time, these are skills you're going to have in your organization, because process automation, the use of AI, etc., is something that's definitely going to come. The last thing I'd like to just touch on, Paul, is that a lot of people will perceive the components of AI as the tools in the cloud, and that's what's available to them. But be aware, like Gavin's company has a massive information around sentiment analysis, previous image analysis, OCR, a whole bunch of stuff that are in models that you can rent off them on a transaction basis for nickels and dimes. The value there is just, it's hard to get your head around. Like 10 years ago, this would have cost tens of millions to get access to. But Gavin will sell you a sentiment analysis service where you can send him an email and he'll ping you back for a fraction of a cent to tell you whether this email is positive about your organization or negative. Those models and that data that gives you that is so valuable, it is now available. It is literally a revolution in IT, and I'm passionate about this because it's maybe I don't get it over. It's a hard message to land, but try it out.
Great. Okay. Thank you. So, Gavin, very briefly, a word of advice.
Yeah. Look, it's kind of the same thing. I think Donald mentioned about the key to being educated before you engage. Do a bit of homework yourself. Do what we did, right? Take that mishmash of the professionals we had and then bring in new talent that understand what's coming out in the state of the art, because that's going to mix really well from an enterprise perspective. And then massive, really important to, and this is the way people are going to market now, co-creation, having those design thinking sessions, those garages, workshops, whatever the buzzwords are that your company are going to use for them. It's kind of putting your feet in as well and figuring it out. And as Don said, trying it out and seeing, does this work or doesn't it work? Is that the value proposition we thought or not? Before you don't have to go in, over your shoulders. That's kind of the way the industry is going in terms of how we sell this tech too. So,
okay, all right. Thank you very much. That's been hugely interesting, and there's so much more ground we could cover. But hopefully, we've given people a flavour both of the practicalities in terms of where these technologies are already delivering value, but also some of the areas that need to be explored to see where it can produce further value for organizations. So next week, we are going to have, I will be in conversation with Danny O'Neill of Animus Labs, and we'll be talking about creating high-performance sales cultures to thrive in a constantly changing and complex customer situation. So again, that should be interesting, and on that theme of constant change. So other Lockdown Your Learning sessions on the 22nd, we'll have Mary Cleary and Mark Jordan, and they will be talking about education and training in these constantly changing environments as well. And then Carmel Summers on the 29th will be talking about aligning the organization's business and human capital strategy for competitive advantage. Also, a final reminder that it is actually Cyber Month, and I'm not going to go through this one in detail. There's lots of different organizations doing various different activities to highlight the industry and the promise and the potential career paths for it. So please do check out ICS or ICT SkillNet or any of the other organizations for information there. So it remains to say thank you to everybody for tuning in, first of all, and thank you to everybody who asked a question or who wanted to or who gave us their opinions in the polls. So thanks to Dr. Gavin Shorten of IBM, to Donald Cullen of Spanish Point Technologies, and we'll hopefully see you again for another Lockdown Your Learning series in the future.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this webinar, please follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn to be kept up to date with all our news, events and programmes. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this one.